I'm live. It says I'm live. Okay. Uh, Thank you so much for joining us. We are here on KISS FM's Taking It Black. I'm your host. I'm attorney Valerie Hicks Hale, and I'm looking forward to spending the next hour or so with you discussing the topics of the day. And the topic of the day is policing in America after the George Floyd murder. Um, Wow, that takes so many different perspectives. We're going to cover what we can today, and I'd love to hear from you. Hopefully, this will give you information that you can use to help educate others in our community. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is so powerful. We have to spend the time, the energy, take the painstaking energy that is needed to get information to make the best decisions that we can. And we can't do that if we're not educated on the topic. So some of what I say today, you're not going to like. It may feel uncomfortable to you, and I'm sorry. But I'm going to give it to you the way I see it. And reasonable people can come to have reasonable disagreements. We just don't want to be disagreeable. So you can give me your response to what I'm saying, and I will read it and we'll discuss it. Hopefully, COVID will get to a position where I can have more people in the studio and we can have these conversations one-on-one. But I want to first off start with the fact that since March 29th, we've had 64 people have been killed by law enforcement nationwide. 64. Black and Latino people represent more than half of those individuals who are dead by the hands of law enforcement. That's about 3 deaths a day. I can't go through them all. All of the information or background information on all of these cases, but there are a few that I want to contemplate while we look at the issue of policing in America after George Floyd. So let's just start with the fact that we eulogized Dante Wright this week. If you recall, Dante Wright was shot and killed by officers, or an officer who contended that she thought she was drawing her bright yellow taser. In fact, she drew her dark black Glock. There are no words for that. There are just no words for that. We eulogized him this week. Again, a senseless death at the hands of a police officer. There was no reason for that. In Elizabeth City, North Carolina, we have another case I want to speak briefly about. An individual, Mr. I think his name was Andre Brown, in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. 2 deputies have resigned and 1 was retired. 7 more have been placed on leave after the shooting death of 42-year-old Andre Brown. They were attempting to enforce or exact a warrant on Mr. Brown at his home. Pasquotank Sheriff's Department or Sheriff's Department were involved in that particular incident and that shooting. The sheriff himself, Tommy Wood, made the statement that the deputies would be held accountable if they are proved to have broken the law or policies. Now, it's a little bit, it gives pause to the fact that you have these officers who, after this shooting, have resigned or have retired. 7 more, well, we know they're going to be placed on leave, but it makes me a little bit uncomfortable to know that these officers have quit or retired immediately after this. And you say, well, it's going to be accountability if, when we see so many times it's not. So people have reason to be concerned. The governor, however, has said, Governor Roy Cooper has called for the body camera to be released. My real problem with a lot of police forces, a lot of law enforcement agencies, is they don't want to release the body cam when it looks bad for them. But they will release the body cam if it shows what they say, if it lines up with what they say. Release the body cam. It is what it is. It's truth. It may be a portion of the truth, but it is truth. This is what happened. Now, it may not be all of what happened, but it's enough of what happened to give the community an understanding of what was going on, what has been going on, or what happened. So I say I agree with the governor that that the body camera should be released. The leaders in the city that is within that county, Elizabeth City, North Carolina, though they're saying that the body camera footage should be released as well. And again, you're looking at making sure that the FBI will do an investigation and ensure accountability. That's only fair. Giving you some background, if you didn't know, they arrived, the officers, deputies arrived at the 400 block of Perry Street to execute an arrest warrant for Brown in Elizabeth City. But the county did this. It was the county deputies. It's my understanding that Mr. Brown attempted to flee and in the process was shot several times. It's said that he was a felon. He was a fleeing felon, which gives law enforcement the right to use deadly force. We have to look at what the investigation shows to determine that indeed he was a fleeing felon, because based on what I'm hearing and reading online, they were executing, it was really a misdemeanor warrant, and they may or may not have been executing a federal warrant. But I do know it was a non-violent, whatever it was based on, I think, drug charges. They unleashed their weapons on him, shooting him numerous times. He was unarmed. One neighbor said she found 14 shell casings. I don't know how a neighbor could find 14 shell casings when it should have been a crime scene so that they could investigate what happened. Another case I want to talk with you about before getting to the gist of why we're talking about this. Adam Taleo. Adam Taleo, as you know, it was just really a few hours after the opening of the Derek Chauvin case when he was shot and killed by Minneapolis officers. Now, this is the case here that gives us pause. The officers ask him to stop and discard the weapon and put his hands up. He did just that. He discarded the weapon. He put his hands up. What happened? They shot him anyway. That situation, I know the officer was running. I know he was in a heavy chase, notwithstanding the fact, I think that it was when you give someone an order, then the anticipation is you would wait to make sure that they followed that order. The kid did what he was asked to do, and he was shot and killed despite that. So it's not unreasonable to think that people are a little unhinged about what's going on in America with law enforcement shooting people over, black and brown people, over and over again. Having said that, and I really feel that we should have accountability for every officer that uses his weapon, because he has the backing of the state or the federal government that gives him that weapon. He or she has to be held accountable. With that said, I feel that not every shooting, just as I feel not every shooting is a good shooting, not every shooting is a bad shooting. And I want to turn our attention right now to the case of Makaya, I think her name is pronounced Makaya Bryant, the 16-year-old who was recently shot and killed. She was recently shot and killed by Officer Nicholas, I think his name is pronounced Reardon, during an altercation. In this situation, the officer received a call from dispatch that there was an altercation going on, that someone had a weapon. And when he arrived, there was chaos. He saw people fighting. And in particular, he saw a weapon in the hand of one of the individuals who was fighting. Now, I've heard it said over and over about how this was a kid. Yes, it was a kid. She was 16 years old and beautiful, a beautiful 16-year-old. She had the face of an angel. But at the time, she was reeling a weapon at another young lady who was just as angelic to her family and friends and wanted her to live as well. He gets out of the car. He yells for them to get down. She, of course, he's behind her, so they never lock eyes. And she doesn't. She's still at the point she is shot. She is attempting to stab another young woman. I'm a little bit concerned about how we have turned on this officer, on this particular officer in this particular case. Her aunt has said in an interview that the body cam doesn't show the truth of what actually occurred. Well, officers say that all the time. When there's an officer involved shooting, for years you would hear, we don't want to show the video because it doesn't show everything that happened. Well, show it and let us decide if we're going to believe it or not. Tell your side of the story, but you're accountable to the people. In this situation, the aunt is saying, well, what you saw in the video doesn't really depict what happened. Well, it depicts what happened when the officer made his decision to fire his weapon. It depicts that clearly. The young lady who did not look 16 to an officer who is getting out of his car and sees someone with a knife going after another young woman. She didn't look 16. She didn't look 16 to me. And even though she was, irrespective of the fact that she was a sweet 16-year-old girl, the fact is at the time she was about to commit what looked to me, and I'm sure the officer, what looked to be murder. It looked like she was about to kill someone. And so as a result, the officer draws his weapon and kills her. I too, like the governor, like one of the officials there said, I wish like hell it didn't happen. I too wish like hell it didn't happen. But I'm sure the mother of that young woman is praising God that her child, who did not have a weapon or means to protect herself from someone coming at her with a knife, I'm sure she is very happy with the outcome. Now, I really want to stay here a little bit with what the officer saw when he got out of his car. Irrespective of who she is, who the people know her to be, when the officer got out of his car, he saw what looked to me to be a grown woman with a knife going at another individual who looked much smaller than her. Whether she was or not, you have a grown woman she looks like, has the appearance of a grown woman going at this individual with a knife. All he saw was the back of her. He didn't know her name. He didn't know anything about how sweet she is. All he knew was he had to make a decision in a split second whether or not he was going to allow her to injure the other girl who was up against the car. She had no place else to go. So he was going to allow her to be injured or possibly killed while he makes a decision regarding the person who has the knife. He made the decision in favor of the young woman who was on the receiving end of that knife. And I don't know that that we really can subject him to Monday morning quarterbacking on the decision that he made. Should he be held accountable and should there be an investigation? Of course. There has to be an investigation into what happened. But to say that automatically because she was 16 years old, he was wrong, and that this shooting ranks up there with the shooting of Dante Wright, or with the killing of George Floyd. I don't see that. I don't see that. Others have asked, why didn't the officer try to de-escalate the situation? I really, why didn't he de-escalate? He gets up again. There's a split second that he has to make a decision. This woman is in front of him. He screams out to stop. She doesn't stop, or to get down. She doesn't get down. She doesn't drop her weapon. And again, he has to make the decision of whether or not he is going to take her down or allow her to take down the subject of her anger. So I don't understand why we're not asking the question, why didn't the adults who were there de-escalate the situation prior to calling the police? Why weren't they trying to de-escalate the situation? You had a grown man who kicked a young woman and kicked her so hard she flipped over. Where's the expectation of accountability there? As I said, Bryant looked to be a grown woman. She was in the throes of carrying out an injury on another child. And you really expect him to stop and negotiate with her to get her to calm down? If that could have been done, don't you think it would have been done prior to him arriving? I think it's really unreasonable to ask that question. No officer's judgment under those circumstances really need to be second guessed outside of an investigation. He saved the life of a child. He had to take the life of a child in order to do so, but he saved the life of an innocent child. And I think it's incumbent upon us to ask, where were the parents? Where were the adults? Why weren't they taking charge of this situation? We expect the police to come in and parent and be the social workers in a situation where somebody is fighting and they are fighting with weapons. I just think that's unreasonable. If it were your child, if it were you, someone you cared about, would you really want the officer to say, let me see, who should I take down? Or should I just step back and let them kill each other and then just take a report? Because that's what it seems like we're asking officers to do. Or we're putting them in a position that that's what they're going to do. They're going to, if we criticize every decision that they make, even the split second decisions that end up with the life of an individual being saved, irrespective of the fact that he had to take the life of somebody that had a weapon, do we really want to live in that kind of community? I'm just asking us, where is the common sense? What is it that we've learned from the George Floyd situation? Are we just expecting every officer now, irrespective of what they do, we expect to have them jailed for it? Because I don't see every shooting, every action by an officer to be based in race or a bad action. We have to live in a community. Do we want to live in a community that is completely devoid of police? You want to live in a community where there are no police, that there's no one to call when someone is attacking you with a weapon and you don't have one? Is that what we're expecting? What would that look like? Do you want the police to show up to a violent situation where you are on the end of someone with a knife or a gun, and the officer only try and talk that individual down while you're being attacked? Is that what you want? Really, the only thing I can say is good luck with that if you're on the receiving end of that. I just think we have to face it that not every shooting is a bad shooting, and not every officer who, every shooting of a brown or black person is excessive force. And we have to really stop acting as though it is. And I am the first to call out officers within law enforcement who are bad actors. We need to purge law enforcement of them. But I don't think it's either fair or helpful. And it's certainly not helpful to the criminal justice reform that we're trying to get through, to prosecute every officer simply for doing their jobs when the outcome is less than what we would have wanted to receive. Now, I'm going to read some of the questions and see what we have. What kind of anger would bring you out of your safe house into the street or front yard to engage in a fight after you yourself call the police? So, thank you for this question. I don't know. I'm dealing with this from a perspective of how we expect officers to be accountable. The individual must have been extremely angry to come out, to bring it out in the street. That kind of anger, I don't think that the police could reason with. And I don't know if that's what this person is trying to get at with this question, but I just don't know that the officer could really be expected to negotiate through that kind of anger when the individual had a weapon. We have another question. Why didn't the officer shoot in the air first or shoot her in the leg or foot? Okay. The reason that an officer doesn't shoot in the air first is because in this situation, the individual was about to be stabbed. So shooting in the air didn't necessarily mean that the individual being on the other end of that knife is going to be saved. It doesn't mean that shooting in the air is going to stop the individual who is about to stab or kill someone or harm someone. So I don't know that we can say he should have shot in the air or shot her in the leg or shot her in the foot. You've got to be a really good aim to get somebody in the foot when they're moving. And the same thing with the leg. You could have shot someone else. He had a decision to make. I have to save this person's life or allow this person to live while taking someone's life, or I have to take this person's life in the process of her trying to attempt to murder another individual. I mean, it was confusing. And I think that it's not unreasonable for him to have made a decision in a split second. Either way, someone was going to be harmed and probably deal with the issue of deadly force. Either way. Here's another question. When the officer engaged to shoot, the female had already missed stabbing the first victim. Yeah, I agree with you. I think at the point he was prepared to shoot, he saw her attempt to hit one person. That individual falls to the ground, and then she goes after someone else. Why am I talking about all this? The reason that I am is to say, is it reasonable? Were his actions reasonable? And when you look at accountability of an officer, I don't know what the process of this investigation will be, but they certainly are going to look at whether or not his actions, in light of the totality of this situation, the dispatcher calling, giving him information that there is an assault in progress, him getting out, seeing that there is an assault in progress. I don't know that we should have the expectation of him stopping to ask who made the phone call about the assault. He has it right there in front of him, an individual who was about to be stabbed. He did the best that he could do in that situation. And I think that it's not unreasonable for us to allow the process to take place and have him have the situation investigated. I genuinely believe that there's a systemic problem of racism in law enforcement, a systemic problem of racism in law enforcement. That has resulted in too many deaths of unarmed Black men, Black and brown men and women and children. That I'm the first to say that. However, we still have an obligation as a community to look at each situation individually, holding the officers accountable for his or her actions individually, not as a collective, not as the collective racist actions of the past or of the profession. I don't think that again is helpful to the cause of police reform or criminal justice reform. The systemic racism that has plagued law enforcement has to be addressed, but I just don't see us saying that because of that, every officer in every situation should be perceived as having racist intent in their actions. And in this situation, I'm law enforcement. My husband is law enforcement. I know lots of people in law enforcement. I respect them, and most of them are good people. The bad ones need to be squeezed out, indeed, but we can't call everybody bad because we have a few bad seeds. Let's look at them individually as though we, in the same way we expect them to look at us individually. Wow. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your questions. I'm going to move on right now to deal with the Chauvin trial and the fact that there was a conviction this week. I want to talk about not just the conviction, but where we're going from here with the next trial, and there will be at least one other trial. Excuse me, if there is not a plea. So he was convicted of second-degree murder, which was the unintentional murder while committing a felony. He was also convicted of third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. And the jurors found there that he was culpable for negligence and a that he consciously took chances of bodily harm against Mr. Floyd. He's going to be sentenced on the 16th of June. So what does that mean in terms of what kind of time he's going to serve? He's going to serve 40 years, or he can serve, not he is. He can serve for up to 40 years in prison. But the sentence depends on several factors. That is, the sentencing guidelines of each state. Each state has sentencing guidelines. What kind of background does he have? They're going to look at his background. They're going to look at, does he have a criminal past? But they're also going to look at aggravating circumstances. And in this case, I really think that the prosecution has a strong case for convincing the court that there are aggravating circumstances in this case. When you look at those aggravating factors, there are factors that include the fact that George Floyd himself was particularly vulnerable. Why was he vulnerable? Because his hands were behind, handcuffed. He was in the prone position and he was handcuffed. He was unable to protect himself or fight back in any way. The action was considered particularly cruel. And there was the other factor was there were children present. And because there were children present, that is considered an aggravating factor. So where he could get as little as 12 and a half years for the second degree murder, 10 years for the manslaughter. I'm sorry, 10 years each for third degree and manslaughter. I don't think it will necessarily play out that way. I think that he'll probably get between 15 and 30 years because you have these aggravated factors that are going to play heavily in the judge's decision. And when you look at how cruel Mr. Floyd was treated in a situation where he had no control, it would be, I think the judge would be remiss to say, well, because this is his first, this is the first occurrence, his first criminal encounter with law enforcement, we're going to give him, the lightest sentence. I'm hoping that won't occur. I'm really hoping that won't occur. Let's see. I have the other officers. I do want to, before I move on to talk about qualified immunity, I want to look at the fact that we have other officers who were there and have been charged and are expected to be tried for their role in this process. Those 4 officers could face up to 40 years in prison themselves if they're found guilty of aiding and abetting murder, up to 10 years for aiding and abetting second-degree murder, and manslaughter. Now, the reality is they're looking between 128 months to 180 months. So it's, they would have a lot less, they're looking at a lot less time. I'm thinking that the officers, looking at what happened at the trial, are probably going to ask for a plea. And it would probably be incumbent on the prosecution to look closely at that as well. Because this case, the case with the officers who were aiding and abetting, it will be a much stronger case for the defense than this case was for Chauvin. One of the reasons is, one thing lawyers don't want to do is show their hand. I don't want to show my hand, right? Well, if I've got 3 more trials coming up and I have the first trial, then my hand, you already know what I'm going to do. You know who my experts are. You know what they're going to say. So you have a hands up on me in that regard. You know what you've already have an opportunity to start preparing your case based on what I've decided I'm going to show, what I've decided I'm going to present to the jury. So, yeah, they've got an opportunity to get ahead of him there. But another thing is that these individuals, 2 of them, all of them were senior to Chauvin, and 2 of them only had, I think, 4 days on the job. So in our office, we call those baby lawyers, someone who's just started in law. We call them baby lawyers. I guess these were baby officers. They were there doing what they were told to do because they were listening to the senior officer. Issue here, though, for me, if I were prosecuting this case, to say, yeah, but they're also human beings. They also saw another human being having the life snuffed out of him, and they did nothing. In fact, they helped assist in the process by keeping others from intervening to stop this individual from committing murder. So I just think it's 6 on one hand, half dozen on the other. I really believe that it would be in the best interest of all to have them plea. And it would not be surprising to me if we saw that coming up. And if you want to send in a question, I'll try and answer it as well while we're here live on Taking It Black 987 KISS. Since I don't have a question about that, I really have to get into qualified immunity. And this program, the purpose of my program is to educate so that you can better make decisions on things in our life and in our community. We're looking at now, Congress is looking at whether or not they're going to end or at least amend the defense of qualified immunity. And I'm going to talk to you about the theory of qualified immunity for law enforcement officers. Ending the doctrine that often lets officers avoid accountability is really going to critically shake up law enforcement, because right now they can shoot us and hide behind that shield of qualified immunity, saying, wait a minute, because I'm law enforcement, I have the protection under the law that says I'm immune from prosecution. But it is qualified as long as I have acted within the scope of the law to make I guess to make it as simple as possible for this next few minutes that we have here on this broadcast. Qualified immunity makes it possible for individuals to makes it very impossible almost for individuals to sue law enforcement. Those individuals who have in law enforcement who have killed someone, injured someone, they can hide behind qualified immunity, saying that, well, you have to prove that they violated clearly established law. To me, that's simple, and it used to be. It used to be back in the 80s. What that meant was a reasonable person. It used the reasonable person standard. It said be clear, a reasonable person would have known an action was unlawful. A reasonable person. Let's fast forward to 2010. Now the law says clearly established meant that every reasonable official, not a reasonable official, but every reasonable official would have understood what he or she was doing violated someone's right or violated the law. Here's the difference between a versus every. It's not semantics. It's really not semantics. I want to be clear about this. We're not talking about semantics here. This is the difference between a measured fair notice standard, which says, okay, I'm giving you notice that this individual is going to be protected under the law until he violates the law. Okay, that's fair. Between that and a system that protects all but plainly incompetent officers or those who knowingly violate the law, as we found with the Chauvin case. Essentially, what the qualified immunity means is that our right not to be shot is less protected by the Supreme Court than the court's desire to shield law enforcement officers. And that has changed over time with case law. Over time, the court has gone in and gotten tighter and tighter, made tighter and tighter that protection, that shield of protection of qualified immunity, where in the 80s, you could occasionally win a case, where now it's almost impossible. An officer can shoot you down and use the protection established by case law under the Supreme Court to use that theory of qualified immunity to avoid not only prosecution, but civil liability. And I think it's gotten out of hand. Justice Sotomayor and Justice Ginsburg, in talking about cases of qualified immunity, put it this way, that qualified immunity is now defined as, by case law, it's been defined as an absolute shield. Let's be clear, an absolute shield to kill. Now, as a prosecutor, I'm given absolute immunity. I don't have qualified, I have absolute immunity, because what I do in the courtroom, if I say the wrong thing, if someone is somehow they feel like they're slandered or whatever, I have immunity of what I say in court. Absolute immunity. I don't know. There may be one. I'm just not familiar with a case where a prosecutor was successfully charged where they weren't just openly going after someone personally. And then that takes out, you're not even operating under law then. But as a prosecutor, prosecutors are given absolute immunity. Why? Because their actions, even though may be devastating, even though may be devastating to the individual, are not imminently dangerous. My speech in a courtroom is not going to cause someone to die in the next day or two, not going to cause somebody to die in the next minute or two. But what the officer does with a gun out in the street, approaching individuals on a daily basis, they have the opportunity to take somebody's life. Their actions place individuals in imminent danger of injury or death. And so for that reason, any immunity given to them should be qualified on the fact that they acted well within or outside the law, right? We should know that they should be able to defend themselves only if they are acting within the law. And to the extent they're not, then they should not be protected by the shield of qualified immunity. So in this case, the reason that I'm bringing this up, we have right now before Congress a bill to address qualified immunity. Will it end? I doubt seriously that it will. I doubt seriously qualified immunity, they'll be able to end it. I do think that they can and should amend it in such a way to address the tightening of the court on that shield that protects unreasonably protects officers under qualified immunity. I think that if they are able to do that, we can balance what qualified immunity was meant to do with our rights not to be shot and killed by police unreasonably. And so I would implore you to take a look at the bill, contact your congressman, know what Congress is about to do with respect to that. I think we have a Congress now that can really make a difference in this next 18 months in certain with certain legislation, whether the Republicans come on board or not. I think that there's an opportunity to make a difference in several areas with respect to court reform, with respect to police reform, with respect to criminal justice reform. They have an opportunity to do that. Will they do it? It's up to you. It's up to us to get our congresspeople, men and women, to do the right thing. Let me see if I've got a question or two. And if not, we're going to be coming to the end of this program today. Let's see. I do have a question. With all the other bad shootings from police officers, can the Attorney General go back and charge those officers? Ooh, good question. Good question. Let me say it depends. It depends on who the Attorney General is. Are we talking about the Attorney General of the United States? Not so much. The Attorney General of the particular state? Yes. The Attorney Generals can go back and look at any case that involves a murder, any case where the statute of limitations has not expired. They can go back and look at those cases to determine whether or not they have evidence to move forward on prosecution or sending it through the grand jury. So I hope that answers your question. The police have the power to, the public, has the power to vote higher authority out of office that are not, I can't make this out. Well, the public has the power of the vote to get out of office those who are. I really can't read this. I'm sorry. I'm not quite sure of what that means. But yeah, the fact is we have the right to vote. Yes, we have the right to vote individuals out of office who are using their power to using their power in a way that results in a disparate treatment to a certain race or to a certain protected class. And we've seen that too much over and over again. So, yeah, we have the power of the vote, and I think that we should use the power of the vote. We are come up on just about the end of the program today. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you all for being a part of our program, Taking It Black. I really am looking at a way that I can actually get your phone calls in, because I've heard so many people say that they like to have access to the phone calls to hear us banter back and forth as we did when we were on air. So I'm looking forward to finding a way to make that happen. In the meantime, thank you so much for being a part of the program, and we'll just keep chugging along. And I'd like to continue to have you join me here on Taking It Black. Have a great one.